Zwelithini has been served with court papers in a bid to stop him from forcing the occupiers of land under Ingonyama Trust to pay rent. King Zwelithini is the sole trustee of Ingonyama Trust in KwaZulu-Natal, which is alleged to have jurisdiction over 30% or 2.8 million hectares of the province's land. On the line, we're now joined by the Council for the Advancement of South African Constitution, Lawson Naidoo. They are taking the King to court. He is the executive secretary there. Lawson, a very good morning to you. Why are you taking the King to court?
Good morning, and thank you very much. This application is really based on the fact that the move by the Ingonyama Trust to convert customary land rights, the permissions to occupy from that status to leasehold status severely weakens the rights to land of people who live on trust-controlled land in KwaZulu-Natal. It reduces their rights to 40-year lease agreements. It requires them to pay rent, to fence their land, and so on. And many of these people are unable to afford the rentals that are being demanded by the trust, and therefore face the possibility of eviction if they default on those rental payments. So it's a critical issue of access to and title to land that needs to be confirmed by the courts.
Also, CASAC has proof that the King is making the occupiers pay rent?
Absolutely. There are a number of lease agreements that have already been signed, and this is a process that goes back to about 2007. In November last year, the Trust published various notices on its website and in KwaZulu-Natal requiring people to sign lease agreements under threat of eviction if they fail to do so. And it is for that reason that this matter is now before the court. Parliament had sought to intervene itself by asking the Trust to desist from these imposing these lease agreements, but the Trust simply ignored Parliament in that matter, and we were therefore left with no other option but to seek redress in the courts.
Feeds into the current land expropriation debate. How are you hoping to tie it in?
Well, this case is fundamentally about securing title to land by people who have occupied that land for generations and for centuries, and is really to provide those residents on trust-controlled land with full title to that land, and to prevent the Ingonyama Trust from diluting or weakening their title to that land, which may, then be taken away from them and leaving them both landless and homeless.
You have apparently brought in some farmers to join you in this effort. Tell us, who are your partners in this action?
Well, it's not farmers. It's the other applicants in the case are the Rural Women's Network, an NGO based in KwaZulu-Natal that's been in existence for over 20 years, as well as several individuals who have been adversely affected by by signing leasehold agreements. These applicants have provided affidavits confirming that they were not informed of the implications of signing lease agreements. For example, they were unaware that they were then going to be required to pay rent, whereas they've occupied this land, as I say, for centuries, without, under customary law, having being required to pay any rent for occupation of that land.
When former President Kgalema Motlante's report came out about what's happening with Ingonyama Trust, their recourse was to say that we are protected in terms of the law. How far do you think you can go in terms of what you try, your effort here?
Well, what we're seeking to do here is to stop the leasehold agreements from continuing, to set aside those agreements that have been put in place, and to reimburse those residents who have already paid monies over to the Ingonyama Trust. We know that the Trust, for example, in the last financial year, raised over 100 million rands from these rental agreements. And even the Auditor General has raised concerns about the lack of accountability by the Trust for the monies that they have collected.
Lawson, 100 million rand. You have to run that by me again.
It's according to the Trust's own figures, they collected over 100 million rands in rental in the last financial year, and there's been no accountability for how that money has been spent.
I have to let you go now, but what are the chances of success?
Well, we think we have a very strong case. I think our court papers amply demonstrate the illegality of the move by the Ingonyama Trust to impose these lease arrangements on people, whereas both the Constitution and the law of the country requires that these informal rights in fact be upgraded to full title.
All right, tell us about your dates and your activities in this regard. When are you appearing in court, all of that?
Well, the papers were filed in the High Court in Pietermaritzburg earlier this week. We will now wait for directions from the court as to the sequence of events. The respondents, which include the Trust, the Ingonyama Trust Board, the Minister for Rural Development and Land Reform, and the MEC in KwaZulu-Natal, are all respondents in this matter, and they will then be provided with an opportunity to respond to our application, and the court will ultimately set a date for the hearing.
And just in terms of sentiment, what sort of support, especially from civic organizations, are you getting in this regard?
Well, there's a huge amount of support on the ground in KwaZulu-Natal for this piece of litigation. But one must also understand that many people are afraid to come forward and to associate themselves publicly with this for fear of intimidation and other reprisals.
Lawson, thank you so much for making the time. We hope to talk to you as the conversation progresses about your action with the courts against the Ingonyama Trust.